Welcome back to DBC. Today we are completing games criminals play. We're going to have three topics we'll cover today, which will be number one, a profile of susceptibility traits and some statistics about what actually happens when we look at the big picture of setups, an employee test to test for susceptibility of being a victim of a setup, and this idea about feeling certain things in our intuition in the air and the game. And then the book will be complete. Beginning with number one, a profile of susceptibility, traits, and statistics. The authors completed a survey of 133 employees who were set up. And the most common factor that predicted susceptibility to being set up was the amount of time that the employee had been working in corrections. 63% of the people that were interviewed were employed for less than a year. And once we got from the year to 3 year, it dropped down to 21%. For people who have been working for 3 to 8 years, 10%, and then above 8 years, 8 to 16, which ended up being was only 5% of the people, so only 1 in 20. So well over half of the people that were set up were employed for less than a year is the takeaway there. And then the next question is, well, what levers were actually used most frequently? And the number one thing that was used was marijuana and pills at 49% being the lever used towards the end of the setup. Next up at 14% were cigarettes. And cigarettes, as we've talked about before, are almost always the very first rule to be tested, limit to be tested, and rule to be broken in even the observation phase and the testing out phase. Other things at 11% were alcohol and clothing, food, other small items, also 11%, money at 4%, and pornography at 2% of the levers. Additionally, 11% were granting sexual favors, and then that's usually done in conjunction with contraband like marijuana or pills. And then 1% of the people were male employees succumbing to homosexual pressure from inmates, which is quite interesting. In 65% of the cases, staff delivered contraband that resulted in staff termination. And the idea here, aside from a safety issue going on in the prison, is that this is so expensive from like an HR or a staffing point of view. Estimates state that 30 to 40%, I'm not sure how they got the estimates, but it's interesting, never check this out. 30 to 40% of people who resign from the correctional professions, they do so that their supervisors and peers don't discover that they've been a victim of a setup. It's all, again, the whole thing is about separating the person from their peers and creating this IU relationship with the inmate and employee. I'm not sure if they got that number. It's compelling, though, assuming it's true. An additional thing about the setup is that there are uneven consequences for participation in a setup. For example, staff involvement results in punitive action for almost all the time, if not all the time, whereas inmate involvement hardly causes any reprimand at all. So there's kind of an uneven consequences. And it almost it provides an incentive for the criminals to try to set somebody up because they don't really have a negative consequence for their actions and the huge safety problem they're creating. Next step, number 2 for today, is employee susceptibility traits. And this is a self-test that they give. There's a bunch of questions. And the idea here is that many traits that are listed that I'll talk about in a second here are appropriate, even demanded in a free society. However, they must be treated with care in a confined situation, society, such as a prison. A couple of questions asked. Are we easily befriended, overly friendly with most people, naive to people's intentions? Are we gullible with their stories, sympathetic to their problems, such that rules might seem secondary to the problems? And are we timid? Again, most of these things are healthy and appropriate in society in general. However, they can be manipulated in a prison and in society in general too. Next question would be like, do you know how to handle compliments in a business-like manner? Do you share personal problems? Do you trust people? Do you want to help the underdog? It's a big one in prison. Do you reciprocate favors, have difficulty saying no? And will you circumvent minor rules? So again, like reciprocation is a huge social norm in society in general. However, it's used in the setup process to manipulate and to have unsafe things happen. And another question would be like, can you be made to feel obligated or to look the other way if a rule that's being violated is no big deal, according to you or according to your justification, right? Another thing here is that prison administrators and employees view these things as strengths and people in general, right? Whereas given in conditions in prison, inmates see them as weaknesses. Last thing I mentioned before we finish is that people who enter corrections are tested inmate manipulators, right? So however, when team members determine it would be difficult to cause that particular honest person to commit a dishonest act, they leave him or her alone and go and search for somebody else. Huge thing is that if we resist at the beginning in the observation phases by being strong and having professional boundaries, and that's probably going to stop the case right there. If it doesn't and they keep going and they search for a small boundary violation like giving cigarettes or something like that, another place to nip it in the bud, as they say, and it doesn't go on. And there's usually not a violent reaction or response from the criminal at that point too, so it avoids all kinds of problems. That is the end of Games Criminals Play. Really cool book. Tune in next time. We'll do a little review of it and see what we liked, what we didn't like, what we'd improve. Thanks for tuning in.